We live in a society that encourages discontent at every turn. It's part of our culture. It's the world we live in. We are constantly told, moment by moment, that what we have is not enough. We need more. Whatever it is. This, that, the other thing. We need more. Whether it's the latest phone or fashion or something else, we are constantly told if we don't get it, we can't be happy or satisfied. The reality of the messaging is even more striking when you consider how much money is spent on it. Let's do interactive. Like you can talk during the sermon in this part, all right? We know General Motors. Some of us drive their vehicles. Anybody want to take a ballpark guess on the average the average amount of money they spend on advertising in the U.S.? Come on, shout it out. 3.4 billion. Who said? Wave at me, whoever said that. Did you work for them or something? I figured we'd get a range, right? So, anybody else want to give us a shot? We're just going to go with that one? That's billion with a B, right? That's right. Or close. Yeah, tell me about it. Last 10, 15 years, actually I Googled it. You can find charts on it. Sometimes it's 2.7, sometimes it's 3.3. When COVID hit, it went down a little bit more than you might expect. But on average, for the last 10, 15 years, General Motors has spent $3 billion a year to tell us we can't be happy until we get what they sell. I hope you think about that commercial a little bit differently this afternoon when you're watching the ball game or whatever it may be. All of that money on all of that messaging to tell us that we cannot be satisfied with what we have. The problem is magnified in the days of social media. Now, some of us are on social media, some of us aren't. If you're not, you don't get a pass here because you still live in a world where our sensibilities are largely crafted, formed, cultivated by the reality of social media. Whether it's baby boomers on Facebook or teenagers on TikTok. I think that's right. That may be changing. I don't even know. You may not know that Twitter doesn't go by that name anymore. Regardless, you still live in a world that is formed by these platforms. And the difficulty there, the challenge that we face, is when we scroll through the pictures, most of us offer a very carefully curated vision of our best life. Right? Very rarely do you see someone who's like talking about the fight they had with their spouse last night. Every now and then somebody will do that, and we're all a little weirded out by it. You know, boundaries, people. Don't we know what this is for? This is about showing us how great your life is and how wonderful it is and how everything is perfect. And that's what we do. We put out the greatest moments. And that's not a criticism. It's just we need to know what's happening to us. And when we sit there and we look at other people's lives, we are inherently invited to compare our life to theirs. What if my kids don't measure up to their kids? What if my life doesn't measure up to their life? What if I don't have what my friends have? And then the result is, number one, we either go get it or we experience anxiety because we don't have it. And it's not just a correlation that as social media has gone on the rise, people's sense of depression and anxiety has also skyrocketed, especially among teenagers. Like we've created a world, not just a world where we're subjected to billions of dollars of messaging that we need something, but also a world where we are constantly keeping up with whoever the Joneses are. The problem of cultures cultivating discontent isn't new. The problem of human beings experiencing discontent isn't new. It goes way back, further than we would probably most of us guess. It's at least 2,000 years old because Paul writes to the Philippians about how to cultivate contentment. How to cultivate contentment with where Jesus has us and what he's offered to us. He invites the Philippians to reflect with him on his own experience of learning to be content with Jesus, whether he's in prison or free, whether he's hungry or full. And the striking thing about it is Paul claims to have found the secret. Did you notice that language? He says, I found the secret to being content. It's in verse 12 of Philippians 4. Verse 11, not that I'm referring to being in need, for I've learned to be content with whatever I have. Notice the language of learned. Come back to that. I've learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have little. I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret. Being well-fed, going hungry, having plenty, of being in need. And maybe we're thinking, wow, well, maybe, could you let us in on that secret, Paul? After all, we're the folks who are consistently subjected to nonstop messaging, whether it's ads on a phone, spots on a radio, commercials on whatever is streaming at the moment. We're constantly subjected to these voices and this messaging saying you need more. You can't be satisfied. You can't be content with what you have. Paul, what's the secret? You might want to know the secret. Maybe we don't want to know the secret. Maybe we're a little bit worried that if we do find out the secret, we'll actually have to be accountable to it or something. Well, Paul wants to tell us whether we want it or not. What is it, Paul? And for Paul, it's this. He would look at us in the face and say, trust everything you've got, that Jesus can satisfy every need. That's the bottom line for Paul in this text. Everything you've got, you trust him that he can satisfy your needs, that he's not just playing with you, that he's not just sort of holding out this kind of cool spirituality, but he can actually satisfy. He understands your desires. He understands that you try to meet those desires with things that will never satisfy them. He gets that about us. He experienced it in his life. We'll talk about that too. We trust him that he can satisfy what I need. Now, this comes out in the context of Paul sort of acknowledging a gift. The Philippians have sent Paul probably financial support. Remember, Paul is writing the letter from prison. And if you were in prison in the Roman Empire, remember that the governing authorities, the civil authorities, they felt no need to meet your needs. No food, didn't care if you were in rags. There's nothing. They're not there to help. You could rot as far as they're concerned, and they're not going to waste money feeding prisoners. That's their perspective. So if you're going to be cared for in that place, you got to have a network, a social network of some sort, family, friends, people who will make sure you get some bread. And so the Philippians apparently took up a collection and gave it to this guy Epaphroditus. And there's no evidence that they're a wealthy church. They probably made sacrifices to do it. Gave it to Epaphroditus and sent him off to Paul. And so Paul here is expressing his gratitude for their gift at the end of Philippians. Now here's the trick. In the ancient world, if you gave a gift to someone, you obligate them to return the gift in some way. The system was called patronage. So if you offer a gift to someone, it's not like you've heard the phrase, no such thing as a free lunch. Well, in the ancient world, there was no such thing as a free gift. If I give you something, then you are bound by society's rules in some way to return the favor, return the gift. And it's not like, oh, I didn't have time because I didn't get by the store. It's you're obligated for this. It's an obligation. And so Paul's in a situation, a bit of a dicey situation here in the way he relates to the Philippians socially, because he's their apostle, he planted the church, and now they've given him a gift, and in the world of the Roman Empire, that creates an obligation that he's got to return to them, and it feels like he doesn't want to be obligated in this text. So what does he do? He expresses his gratitude. He honors them for being one of the churches that supported the ministry when no one else did. But then he sort of moves their gift away from him and frames it as a sacrifice to God. This comes up in verses 18 and following. Well, let's go to 17. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the profit that accumulates to your account. Like, this isn't about me, this is about you. Like, when you give, when you care for me, the Lord is at work in some way, and it's good for you. I've been paid in full. I have more than enough. He's in prison, but he's all, I have more than enough. I'm fully satisfied now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, and this is the key piece. Your gift wasn't really primarily a gift for me. It's an offering to God. A fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. So now, if the gift isn't to Paul, the gift is to who? God. And they're offering their service to him. He shifted the relationship from Paul and the Philippians to the Philippians and God. And then he tells them the great news is God is the one who will satisfy you. He'll satisfy your needs. Now, your needs may not be what you think they are. But God is the one who is able to satisfy them, and only he is able to satisfy them. Paul can't satisfy. Like, if Paul is obligated to the Philippians, he'll never meet their needs. Only one. And this is the place where Paul is really drawing our attention. Like, if you want to talk about contentment, satisfaction, being freed from the desire for more, free from slavery to more, offer yourself to God. Understand that you belong to him and that he is the only one. He is the only one who can satisfy the longings of your heart. He's the only one who can satisfy your desires. And so Paul moves that. He honors them. Thank you. But let's remember, God is the only one who can satisfy your needs. So let's define contentment. We're reflecting on Paul. We're talking about cultivating contentment. That's what this passage is about. So what are we talking about here, just as we've read it? Let's say it this way. We've heard this word satisfaction. That's popped up in the text a few times. And I think it's a helpful way to frame it. If I'm content, then I'm satisfied. Satisfied with what? Well, I'm satisfied with where God has me. And satisfied with what he's given. Satisfied with where he has me. Satisfied with what he's given. The key question then is, am I satisfied with that? It's not complicated, is it? Am I satisfied? Or is there a craving in me for something else, some satisfaction elsewhere? Satisfaction from something or some status, or I'll only be the person I want to be till I get that degree or till I get that promotion or whatever it is. Am I satisfied with where he sent me? With the vocation he's given me? With the context in which he's placed me? Am I satisfied with that? Am I at his disposal? Or do I need to fix what God has done? We would never say it that way, would we? But when we are dissatisfied with what he's offered us in his wisdom and in his providence, then we really are sliding into, God, let me fix this for you situations, aren't we? So that's where we are here, and that's what Paul's after. And you heard him use the language of learning contentment. So learning to be satisfied with where God has us and what he's offered us. What does it look to like? So this isn't just kind of, well, I feel it. It's not just a feeling. It's not just an emotion. It's not like I'm in the mood to be content. Like, that's not how it works, is it? It's learned. It's a discipline. If it's learned, it's developed like other disciplines. So Paul says you cultivate this. Cultivate contentment. And when you do, you discover a deep joy in your life in relation to God, in Christ, and the Spirit. Now, before we get into how we actually cultivate this, because he gives us some help on that, it may be helpful to think about Paul's own experience for a little bit. Because remember, Paul, before he met Jesus, was an upwardly mobile, young, ladder-climbing Pharisee. If you read through Galatians, he talks about his former life before he met Jesus. And he says, of all my peers, all the other guys my age, I was head and shoulders above all of them. I had advanced beyond my peers. Like, this is a guy who's trying to climb his ladder. Whatever the ancient version of the ladder is, he's trying to climb it. He's got influence. He's got resources. He has authorization from powerful people to go arrest people who follow Jesus and drag them back to Jerusalem in chains. Like, this guy's connected. And then he heads off toward Damascus. Something happens on that road. He winds up blind. We might say Paul met Jesus. It may be more accurate to say Jesus met Paul in that place. He goes back off to begin recovering, begin healing. And in Acts chapter 9, we're told about a guy named Ananias who God gives him a message for Paul. Ananias is hesitant. No surprise there. After all, this is the guy who was persecuting people like Ananias. But God says, no, I want you to go. I want you to give Paul a message. And here's the content of the message, beginning in Acts 9, verse 15. The Lord said to Ananias, go, for he, Paul, is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before the nations and kings and the people of Israel. You go tell this upwardly mobile Pharisee that he's the one I've chosen. He's my instrument to bring my name to my people, Israel, to the nations, to kings. That's his vocation. That's what I've called him to do. I know, counterintuitive, because since he was opposing me, but hey, this is what I'm calling him to do. And then he says this, and this is the striking thing. This is the unsettling thing. This is the jarring thing. Verse 16, God says, I myself will show him, Paul, how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. My guess is if our altar calls usually involved an invitation to suffering, our altars would be quite empty. Here he is, all the influence anybody could ever ask for. And God says, I'm going to change your life, and you're going to suffer for the gospel. You're going to bring the good news to the nations, but it won't be comfortable, it won't be safe, it won't be easy, and it'll hurt. And I wonder how many of us would be on board for that. I mean, would I be on board for that? I'm not sure sometimes. Like, we found a way to do this thing and be pretty comfortable, haven't we? And it's jarring to me to be brought face to face with the question, O'Reilly, is Jesus enough for you? Take away all the cool stuff. Offices and budgets and screens and electricity. Is Jesus enough? I have a friend who used to be the president of a seminary in Haiti. And one time he shared a picture on Facebook of a Haitian woman who was on her way to church. The journey was miles, and she had a chair on her head. Would you come if we made you bring your own seat? Would we? Would any of us show up if we had to carry our chair up here? Like, is Jesus enough for us to show up if he's all there is? These texts are jarring. They are unsettling. They are painful. And they are convicting. I'm not sure I'd show up, honestly. And that disturbs me. But this is what God has for Paul. And it's not because God doesn't like Paul. It's not because God is angry with Paul. It's not because he wants to punish him for persecuting his people. It's because God loves Paul. God loves him. He's made him his instrument. He's commissioned him with, like, this is the Great Commission. You're going to take my name to the nations. You remember reading Isaiah? You remember when the prophet said the day is going to come when the nations flood to worship the God of Israel? Like, that day has come. And you get to be one of the leaders in the movement. Most of us would be like, that's awesome. That's exciting. Let's do it. Oh, by the way, you're going to get locked up in a dungeon. And people are going to beat you with whips. Like, is Jesus still enough? Does he satisfy me? Are my desires fulfilled with him and him alone? Just Jesus. Only Jesus. Paul can say, I've learned the secret because he was willing to walk away from his upwardly mobile life. He was willing to walk away from the influence that he had attained, the reputation that he had developed. But he'd found the secret. The holes that all those things surely left in his life did not go unsatisfied, did they? They were satisfied by Jesus. When Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, he's not talking about scoring a touchdown. He's talking about surviving death row. Not surviving it like alive in that sense, but surviving it having not failed to honor Jesus. That's why he says earlier in Philippians chapter 1, like, I want to honor Christ in my body before the emperor. I'm on trial. I may not make it out of this alive. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to hedge my bets. I don't want to not testify to Jesus just to save my neck. That's what he's worried about. You can feel the angst in his voice. You can feel the concern. What's the secret? Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I can survive a trial before the emperor of Rome if Christ gives me strength. I can survive shipwrecks. I can survive floggings, Paul says, if Christ gives me strength. All these things. It's jarring, isn't it? It should be. The good news is that God is indeed concerned for our happiness. The surprising thing is that happiness doesn't come the way we thought it did. God wants us to be happy, but he also understands that a lot of the things that we think will make us happy can destroy us. It's not necessarily the case that they will, but they can. If they get our hearts, they can destroy us. For Paul, he wants the Philippians to know, he wants us to understand. Jesus wants us to be happy. But happiness doesn't come with acquiring more. Happiness comes when Jesus reproduces his character in us. The mind of Christ, right? This is what the whole letter's about. Paul, I want you to have the mind of Christ, the mind that was in you, the posture, the character, the life that was in Jesus. I want it to be in you, Philippians, and Christ Church. And when it is, when Christ's life overtakes you, when he fills you up, when he reproduces his character and his heart and his passion in you, you'll be happy. Your desires will be fulfilled. You'll be whole. You'll flourish. That's what he wants to give us. But if our hearts chase after other things, it's hard to find our satisfaction in him. It's probably easier if you don't have the stuff. But if you do have the stuff, perhaps you have to be even more diligent. Perhaps we must be even more diligent and vigilant to make sure Jesus has our hearts and not something else. It's subtle and it's deadly. So how do we cultivate this contentment that Paul calls for, that he invites, that he offers to his readers? Number one, guard against covetousness. That's the issue, right? Am I satisfied with what the Lord has given me and where he has me, or do I want something that's not properly mine? This problem is way older than any of us ever have probably realized. Some ancient interpreters of the Bible suggested this was actually the commandment that Adam broke in the garden. They figured Adam had to be violating one of the 10 commandments because they're so important. Which one is it? And if you think about the situation, right, God has given him everything, like all the trees, all the plants, all the fruit, all the animals. Genesis 1 tells us, God says, I'm giving you all of it. Make it fruitful. Make it beautiful. You can have all of the stuff. Except one thing. There's one tree in the middle. It's mine. Don't touch it. And Adam wanted more, didn't he? Everything wasn't enough. All the other trees weren't enough. He wanted that one. He coveted the fruit of the one God had reserved for himself. And he was mastered by the desire for more. And ever since, all of us have had to deal with the very same question. Do you want more of God or more of something else? It doesn't have to be like physical stuff. It could be a certain reputation. Do I want more of God or more of something else? So guard against covetousness. What do I want so much that I'm willing to lose my satisfaction in Jesus to get it? And however you answer that question, guard against that thing. Paul would have us practice gratitude. That's number 2. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. You know what's striking about this is here's this guy with nothing. I mean, he's locked up, and he's not going to eat if they don't show up with food. And he starts the letter about how he has been praying for them and giving thanks to God for them long before Epaphroditus ever showed up with that basket of bread. Here's a guy who in the lowest place of his life practiced gratitude. And I think it's pretty simple. If we're giving thanks to God for what he has given us, then we're probably not going to be consumed with what he hasn't. It seems mutually exclusive, doesn't it? Like you can't do both. You can't go, thank you for this. Now, where's the other stuff? It doesn't work that way, does it? And if we are consistently practicing a posture of gratitude to our God, won't we find ourselves increasingly content with him and where he has us and what he's given us? That seems pretty straightforward to me. So Paul says, express your gratitude to God. Discipline the mind, Paul would say in verse 8. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, this is number 3, if you're keeping up. Guard against covetousness, practice gratitude, discipline the mind. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. If we are consistently disciplining our minds to be considering what is true, honorable, and just, once again, I think it's hard to slide into, but I really want that. Right? If my focus is on Jesus, and sometimes you may have noticed, like, Jesus is true. Jesus is honorable. Jesus is just. Jesus is pure. Jesus is pleasing. Jesus is commendable. Jesus is excellent. Jesus is worthy of praise. It's almost as if he's saying, friends, bring it back to Jesus. Your heart, your mind, your posture, your being, trust him to satisfy what those distractions will never satisfy. And you will cultivate contentment. And then the thing, seek the interests of others. That's what the letter's about, remember? And in the end of it here in verse 17, chapter 4, remember he says, I don't seek the gift, but I seek the profit that accumulates to your account. They've just brought him gifts, and Paul says, I'm primarily interested in what God is doing in you. He's locked in prison. He's primarily interested in what God is doing in the church, in the Philippians, with the mission. That's what he cares about. Other-oriented love. If you cultivate other-oriented love, it's very difficult to leave space for, I really want one of those. Right? If my life is spent in prayer and love, service for others, for God and neighbor, there's not a lot of space for more of stuff or reputations or credentials or whatever it is. Could be anything. Other-oriented love. And we begin to see that for Paul, all of this goes back to Jesus reproducing his life in us. Reproducing his character, his mind, his posture. Have the same mind that was in Christ Jesus, who did not consider equality with God something to be exploited. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't strategizing. What can I get out of this? How can I hedge my bets for my best? He didn't consider equality with God something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave and suffering even unto death, death on a cross. Friends, you want to know why trusting Jesus is the secret to contentment? Because you can trust that if someone will bleed for you, they want what's best for you. If he will die for you, he's got nothing held back for our best and our good. If he's so committed to what's good for us that he will endure spikes in his wrists and spears in his side and thorns in his face, you can trust him. We can trust him to satisfy every need, every desire. The problem for us is when our desires are out of order. When we take desires for things other than Jesus and put them at the top of our life. What would it look like in the American church? This isn't as big of a deal in a lot of places. But what would it look like in the American church to be so consumed with Jesus and more of him we trusted everything we've got that he would meet every need? Would that change this country? I expect so. That's why this isn't just like self-help counseling stuff. It's not like, hey, you want to avoid anxiety? Here's some ways to cultivate contentment. It's not like pseudo-psychological individual counseling or something. That's not what we're doing here. This is about how the church fulfills its mission. Right? Because if we're distracted from Jesus, we're probably not loving our neighbor. If we're distracted from Jesus, if we're seeking to fulfill our satisfaction in anything other than Jesus, we're probably not engaged in evangelism or discipleship or the Great Commission. Like Paul commends this and invites the Philippians and us to cultivate it, because this doesn't work if we don't. It doesn't work if we don't. And you know, brothers and sisters, from experience, that when you do put your eyes on Jesus and you look to him for your satisfaction, you can change a neighborhood in the inner city of Birmingham. You know, when people value the poor more than their stuff, you can transform a community. You know that. It's your vision. And it was long before we ever heard of each other. How long has Christ Church been at East Lake, Jody? 13 years. 13 years of self-giving love. Imagine what's next. There's another 12 years of that. I suspect we probably won't pull out in 12 years. But what's next? What other neighborhoods in the city need a church plant? Need a ministry? What other places around the corner need a church committed to the gospel and nothing else? You know the neighborhoods better than I do. You've been here longer. What are the places in the world that need a church that loves Jesus more than the desire for more? And don't you want to be a part of that kind of church? I sure do. That's a church that changes the world. So be vigilant this afternoon when GMC's $3 billion shows up in your living room or on your phone or on the radio. Be vigilant when other voices say, look what you could spend your time and energy on. Look where you could take your focus to. This will satisfy you. This is what you need. If you're going to be happy, this is the thing that you've got to have. And you know, that's from hell. I have learned to be content with whatever I have. Little or plenty, all circumstances. I've learned the secret of being well-fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. Trust everything that Jesus can satisfy every need. And he will. If he's willing to die for you, he will not forsake you.